Hi, I'm Rick Anthony, and welcome to the Someone You Should Know podcast, the podcast that focuses on musicians, authors, and interesting people. We like to say we're making a difference one artist at a time. So sit back, have a cold one, and get ready to meet someone you should know. It's Halloween time once again on the Someone You Should Know podcast, and I couldn't think of a better person to talk scarier things on this Halloween than the man who's been doing scary podcasts for a very, very long time. Now, our humble podcast celebrated its 1-year anniversary this month. This man celebrated his 18th anniversary of doing podcasts last July. He's the host of several podcasts that all pertain to the scary, the spooky, the paranormal. Will you please welcome my friend and radio brother, Jim Harold. How you doing, buddy?
Good, sir. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you and your audience. It's great to be here. My favorite, the most wonderful time of the year in my book, and great to talk to you about spooky stuff and podcasting and radio and all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jim, once again, congratulations. 18 years on the Paranormal podcast. Leslie and I became fans of Paranormal many years ago, but we stumbled across your podcast show while driving back from Southern Illinois, and now we are regular listeners to several of your podcasts. How did your love affair with paranormal begin, Jim?
I blame Leonard Nimoy. When I was a little kid. I was a little kid. I started watching In Search Of, and I started delving and reading the books. I remember going to the school library and reading Charles Berlitz's books about the Bermuda Triangle and unsolved mysteries, and kept reading and was fascinated by it. So when I started podcasting, I thought, well, what am I going to podcast on? And it was an absolutely natural fit because it's something that I had a legitimate interest in and passion for and still do even to this day.
Absolutely. After 18 years, you've learned a lot about the paranormal, too, I'm sure. There's a lot of stuff that opened your eyes through the years that you didn't know when you were much younger, obviously. Is there a subgenre of the paranormal that you gravitate toward? Ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, anything like that?
Well, I think, and I appreciate you mention all those different things, because now people think the paranormal means just ghosts. And it does, in my mind, it does not. It's a very broad
absolutely.
A big tent. But to answer your question, the afterlife.
Because
we might not all see a UFO. We might not all see a Bigfoot. But I do have some news for everyone listening. Eventually, many years from now, hopefully, all of us are going to have to walk that journey. And whether you are, a hardcore skeptic who thinks when you're dead, or someone who does, like I do, believe in an afterlife, we're all going to have to make that journey. So what lies beyond that, to me, is pretty much, I think, the ultimate universal question.
And here's the thing also, I get a lot of people talking about this when they start talking about paranormal. If you believe in the paranormal, you don't believe in religion or organized religion and stuff like that. That's total hooey.
Yeah, I agree with you. I came from, the Christian faith, not a huge churchgoer or anything, but always that's been like the basis of my faith, and celebrate all the holidays and so forth. And, I think that you can have your religious beliefs and still have an interest in the paranormal. I personally don't find them to be mutually exclusive.
All right, very good. Now, one of the topics that you had a while back on one of your podcasts is the one that, as they say, freaked my cheese the most. And that's when you started talking about black-eyed children. I'd never heard of this. And my wife, Leslie, goes, oh, yeah, I'm very familiar with black-eyed children. It scared the daylights out of me when I heard that. Can you share that on this Halloween, what black-eyed children are all about for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, this started cropping up on the internet in the 90s. Actually, I got to interview the guy, I've spoken to him a couple of times, who was kind of the originator of these stories, because he had an experience in the 90s. Brian Bethel, he's a journalist down in Texas, very credible guy. And basically, he told this story where, and this kind of dates it, he was sitting in a parking lot writing a check. He had to get the check into a Dropbox or something to meet a bill. So that's how long we're talking about. No internet, folks, or very early rudimentary internet. And all of a sudden, this kid knocks on his window in the car. And the kid said, "Mister, can you give us some money? We'd like to go to the movie over here." Now, there was a theater. They had like one screen and there was a movie playing, but the movie had already started. The show times were up on the marquee. The show had already started like an hour and 20 minutes before. "I really want to go. I really want to go. Can you help us? Can you give us some money? Can you help us out?" And he looked up and this kid had totally black eyeballs. So not like a black-eyed kid like they got punched. I mean, kids with solid black eyeballs. And he would not engage with him. He went away. And he told this story, and these stories started to crop up on the internet. And the idea is that you come across these kids, they're making some kind of request of you. Let me into your house. One that I heard one time was knocked on somebody's door and said, "I have a hot dog. Can you give me some mayonnaise to put on it?" And but they all have these black eyes. And the lore is that if you let them in, whether it's into your car for a ride or into your house, that something awful will befall you, whether it's an illness or death or just general misfortune. And the thing is that they always form in the guise of needing help, because of course we want to help kids. Absolutely. And the other thing that it is that they never get things 100% right. For example, the movie. Well, the movie was almost over, so it didn't really make any sense. And it was late at night. They weren't going to play another movie. So it didn't make sense to say, "Hey, mister, I need money to get into this," because the movie was almost over. Or the kid with the hot dog and the mayonnaise. But could you imagine, Rick, opening, hearing your doorbell, going to the door and seeing a kid with totally black eyeballs?
Yeah, it would freak me out.
Terrifying.
Absolutely. The one story you told, Jim, I think was one of your listeners. This was, I believe, on the Campfire. They had mentioned the fact that they were in a car, and these kids had come up to the car, and the woman said no, and then she drove down the road, and then she got to her next destination, and they were there again. And then she drove a little further, and she had to go into the store, something like that, and her child or something like that was talking to the kids or something like that. Yeah, that one really got to me. I mean, I was driving down the road with chill bumps on my arms and everything like that. That really freaked me out.
We had another one, Tony from Tennessee. And he lived in a college town, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and someone was banging on his door, and he thought it was college kids. And it was this young girl, and she was looking down, and maybe 13, maybe 14. He opens the door, and she's like, "Let me in. I need to use your phone." He's like, "I can't let you in." "Let me in. I need to use your phone." "No, I can't let you in. They sent me. This will only take a minute. Let me in. Let me use your phone." And then I think the 4th or 5th time they had this exchange, everything went very cold and like this breeze, and she looked up and it was the solid black eyeballs.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
My. Where do they emanate from? Any
I
guess?
don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it seems like a close cousin to like the Men in Black phenomenon, going back to the Mothman prophecies and those kind of things. Maybe there's some kind of demons. Here's another theory. The jinn. I don't know if you're familiar with
very
the
familiar.
jinn,
Yes,
which
absolutely.
basically are the kind of where the idea of genies came from that we see, in popular culture and movies and things. And I had been at a talk with the great researcher Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Know her well.
Yeah. Oh, she was the best.
Absolutely.
She was the best. And she gave an extensive talk on the jinn. And she said the thing about the jinn is they can present themselves in different forms, but they often don't get everything right. They might be 90% of a perfect duplicate of whatever they're portraying, but there's something always off. And that reminded me of the black-eyed kids. So maybe this is some form of jinn.
They're replicating and getting it wrong. I never forget when we wound up going. I was in the military, and we did they call it an EML trip to Korea, and they were making knockoffs of starter jackets, and it was like you would have the Denver Broncos in red and white, or the Pittsburgh Steelers in green and yellow. It was just like,
slightly off.
Slightly off. It's just exactly there. But Jim, you've been doing this for 18 years, the podcast for 18 years and such. Any favorite guests or favorite stories? Since this is Halloween, can you share a couple of your favorite guests and stories?
Well, favorite guest, I just mentioned one of them, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. She was on the show literally 20 times.
Oh, my.
And she always had great stories. But I want to tie something back to the gin that happened when I had Rosemary on. Rosemary was one of those guests who always sent me her books. And from being in radio, you get a lot of books. You get a lot of, if you're doing music, you would get a lot of music. And you couldn't keep everything, right?
Right.
But when I get books, some of them I pass along, some of them I donate. But I would always personally keep the Rosemary Ellen Guiley books and the Brad Steiger books, another one of my favorite guests. And so I interviewed her in 2013, April of 2013, about the gin. It was April 2nd, I'll never forget, and interviewed her. Interview went well. I had the book there, to kind of crib off of. And then later that night, I get a call that my uncle died, who was like a second dad to me, which, and he was ill and he was in the hospital and we knew he was ill, but I don't think anybody thought that he was in any immediate danger whatsoever of dying. We knew there were some issues going on, but we thought, well, this is something that's going to go on for a while and hopefully he can, things can go well. But nobody thought he was near death. At least I didn't. And he died. So I thought, boy, that was a weird coincidence. I just did that show on the gin. April 15th, basically 2 weeks later, I get a call in the middle of the night. My mom died totally unexpectedly at the age of 70 years old. And I got to thinking, Rick, and I'm like, it's probably a coincidence. But that book found its way to the garbage can.
Okay.
Because I thought, you know what? I think the world of Rosemary, she is the best. I've got all her books, but I don't think I want this book. And I'm not saying the book was cursed or anything, but it just felt a little too close for comfort. You know what I'm saying? These two unexplained deaths right on the heels of that interview and having that book. And I said, you know what? Maybe I'll get rid of this book. And I did. And I kind of felt badly about it, and I didn't want to give it to somebody else because if it was in any way bad luck, I didn't want to say, here, have some bad luck.
That reminds me of those stories where people will go to yard sales, estate sales, and stuff like that and bring home something, and all of a sudden the dynamics of the house changes. Oh,
I have a perfect story for you along that line. This was a gentleman who went to a rummage sale, lived in L.A., unlimited budget, wanted to buy some furnishings for a new apartment he and his wife had gotten. He went through there and said, this stuff's kind of pricey. I can't afford this right now. But he gave his card to the lady running the sale saying, hey, as you get to the end of the week, if you need to get rid of some pieces and you're willing to negotiate a little more, give me a call. So anyway, she calls him like that Friday or Saturday or whatever and says, hey, these people are disrespecting me. They don't want to give me anything. I liked you. Come on down. We'll work out some deals. So there was a piece or two he was interested in. And she gave him a great deal. And she said, also, I want to give you this mirror. And he's like, and it was this huge, like, old mirror with a gold frame. And he's like, well, I wasn't really looking for a mirror. And she's like, no, I think you need to have it. So anyway, he takes the stuff home. Weird stuff starts happening around the apartment, noises and stuff. And the one day he's lying on his couch. I think it's an upstairs bedroom where this mirror is. And he wakes up and he hears somebody in the room, and he literally sees, he says, a crowd of people in kind of old-time clothing, and they're dancing.
Oh my goodness.
And he's like rubbing his eyes like, what am I dreaming? This is crazy. And then he looks and the one guy steps forward. He looks like he's the leader, and he's like, we like to dance. We came with the mirror.
Oh no.
And we like to dance, and that's where you come in. And he's like, oh my God. And
they want me to DJ it.
It's like, oh my God. So anyway, and it's a longer story.
Oh dear God. God.
But all these weird things happen. You know, he tells his wife, and she's like, "Oh, you had a crazy dream." But weird stuff kept happening. Stuff moving in the apartment. He would be at work, nobody else at home. His wife would be in the downstairs part because I think it was two, you know, and up and down. Mm-hmm. And she would literally hear people walking upstairs, and they had a paranormal investigator come in, and just amazing. But the funny thing is that a few years later, maybe a couple of years ago, I interviewed him again about the story on video so we could put it on the YouTube channel. And he was literally sitting there telling me the story, sitting in front of the mirror. Now, I don't know about you, Rick, but if I had that mirror, I would not have that mirror. That mirror would be long gone. Oh, yeah. I don't need that in my life. Mm-hmm. But some people, you know, he must have liked the mirror and decided to keep it. Braver guy than I am.
Yeah, I'll tell you, they say mirrors are the portals to the other dimensions, too. So there you go. And here's the thing.
And I do believe there's something to haunted objects. Yeah. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Leslie, my wife Leslie, loves to hit rummage sales, yard sales, estate sales, and stuff like that. But she's very smart in that when she brings it home, she usually sages everything to make sure that no bad juju comes inside the house. So
yeah, you know, I the funny thing is, I joke that I used to do a lot of that, but there's two reasons I don't. One is my wife's like, "Stop bringing that old junk in the house," and the other one is I do worry about that a little bit. You know,
I don't blame you. I mean, you've been involved with this for over 18 years. You know a thing or two, especially. By the way, let me say something about Jim's podcast here, folks. Here's something that you might not know. His programs have been downloaded over 60 million times. Well,
thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
I'm still working on my first million there, Jim. So
no, that number, when I added them all together, and that's all the podcasts over 18 years, so it's not, you know, YouTube can go viral and have 100 million in a week. So it's not as impressive as it sounds, but I was still blown away, and I thought, if I only had a dime for every one of those downloads. But still, seriously, I am super grateful because I came into podcasting as a hobby. I never thought it was going to be my job, and here I get to talk about neat, spooky stuff for a living. Absolutely. How cool is that?
I know, that's just it. That's like this podcast, Jim, in the sense that I retired from radio, did radio all my life, and here I am doing this just out of fun. I do it I interview one person a day, and it is just a fun thing to do, and it gives me a chance to talk to wonderful people like you. Jim and I talked before, but this is just a fun thing to do, and I really enjoy doing this because it allows me to still get my voice out there. People say, "Oh, I miss hearing you on the radio." Well, you got my podcast. And so there you go. Hey, listen, I want to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Someone You Should Know podcast. I want you to go to our website, SomeoneYouShouldKnowPodcast.com. There you're going to find our recent news, our archive of past episodes, and a whole lot more. Plus, if you happen to be there, on the bottom of the first page, there happens to be a way for you to communicate with us. Just let us know how we're doing. Give us a rating. Let me know how we're doing, okay? And we are so blessed to reach so many cities around the world. We'd like to salute a couple of new ones. Prague in Chechnya, Bantry, Ireland, Salem, Massachusetts, and Jim's hometown of Cleveland. There you go, Jim. Maybe it's you listening. The Someone You Should Know podcast, heard everywhere that streaming audio is available. Now back to our spooky Halloween podcast with Jim Harold. Jim, this is a question I had to ask you. Leslie and I were kind of talking about this last night. Because of the subject you discuss on the Paranormal podcast, aliens, UFOs, and UAPs, especially what's going on with Congress now, have you had any visits from the Men in Black or any government involvement with the cease and desist?
No, you know, I've often wondered about that. It's like,
who's that car out front there? What's that strange car out there?
Yeah, I've often, I will see a strange car. I'm like, but no, thankfully not. Yeah, I mean, and the audience itself has been great and very nice. Just the other day, I got something in my mail. Somebody made these beautiful cards for me, like these handmade cards. I was just blown, like greeting cards. I was just blown away. And we do something, I don't know what we're going to do this year, but in the past we've done a holiday ornament contest, which is something I stole from one of the radio stations I used to work for. So I guess my point is that it has been, occasionally you'll get somebody who is with a nasty gram and those kind of things. But I would say 98% plus have been positive interactions. The people are very nice, and so far the government hasn't knocked on my door. But I do have a little funny story. I do have a little funny story.
Go.
When I worked in radio full time, I got called to jury duty.
Okay.
And I told them the radio station I worked for and everything. It put me right on the jury, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got called to jury duty after I started doing this full time, because I've been doing this. I've been full time since 2012, but there was a period there between 2005 and 2012 where I just did it on the side for fun. And I was doing this full time, and I'm like, I'm going to be perfectly truthful, but I'm wondering how this will be taken. So I did a little experiment. It's like, sir, when they poll you, get ready, what do you do for a living? It's like, well, I'm a full-time podcaster, but I didn't stop there. I said, yeah, I cover topics, like UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts. That's what my shows are about. And, within a few moments was, jurist number 7, thank you for your service. You can go home now. And I'm like, yes, it worked. But I did not lie. I told the absolute truth. But I made sure to lean in on the
paranormal,
the subject matter, just to make sure they heard it clearly.
And by the way, I know exactly where Loch Ness Monster is. And I actually had lunch with D.B. Cooper.
But the weird thing is about that, Rick, I think it's me, is there is this kind of bias. People think, he's a kook, whatever. But the truth is, I found, particularly with my Campfire show, almost everybody has a story of something that has happened to them that might be paranormal. Even the skeptics, like, I don't believe in this stuff. Now, there was this one time, and it seems like everybody has that one time. So, but it was an interesting experiment. It worked out exactly like I thought it would.
All right, very good. Now, we're talking, by the way, about Jim's audience participation podcast called Jim Harold's Campfire, which Leslie and I are avid listeners to. I don't think we've missed an episode since we started listening. Absolutely love the stories there. How did that one start, Jim? You were obviously doing the other paranormal podcast. How did this one start?
It was actually a happy accident, and really the accident that's made it possible for me to do this full time, I'm convinced. One week I didn't have a guest. And I thought, you know what? Well, what we'll do is we'll just have listeners come on and tell spooky stories. And it got a really good response. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but this is a separate podcast. And it started, and just people, I'm sure universally they don't love it, but the feedback I get is people absolutely love it and love listening to the stories and appreciate the opportunity. And it's not the only place, but to have a place where they can tell their supernatural stories without, kind of to my earlier point, being laughed at or ridiculed or any of that. It's a very, I don't particularly like this phrase, but it's a very safe space in the sense that I'm not going to Mike Wallace them, and I'm going to listen to their story and come from a place of understanding and empathy. So, it just kind of took off, and it really kind of, I think, really launched the ability to make a full-time job out of this.
And one of the cool things about the Jim Harold Campfire that I really love is a subject that you have is probably one of your favorites, the head scratchers. Let's talk about some of your favorite head scratchers. The one I had to connect with you on, I actually wrote you on, had to do with the guy that jumped from the overpass.
Oh, yeah.
And the ambulance showed up, and then there was no record of an ambulance or a police car showing up there.
Yeah, what happened was, this was a guy in the Northwest. He's a police officer. And he got a call that there was like kind of this wild man jumping over overpasses and just kind of crazy. So him and another guy went out, and this guy was like feral. He was naked. He looked like he was cut up. He kind of looked like a wild animal. And they tried to subdue him. He was jumping over the overpass and through the bushes and things, tried to subdue him. And then he started, and this is the story, the guy started defecating himself. And I always call this story soft serve, because he said that's what that's what it looked like. I mean, my goodness. But anyway, So anyway, they're trying to subdue this guy. All of a sudden, a state police car comes up. And he knows, like most of the officers that are in that area. He doesn't recognize this guy. He's like, we've got taken care of. And he was kind of a jerk. And he made a mental note of his badge number. A minute or two later, ambulance pulls up, takes this guy away. Same thing. He makes a note of the number on the truck. He gets back to the station. He's talking to his colleagues. Oh, this is kind of just a crazy happening. Here's what happened. Said, does anybody know this state trooper with this badge number? You know, he was a real jerk, and most of those guys are really nice. Could not find any record of a state trooper with that badge number. Then he called or talked to dispatch or something, had them check into this ambulance. And the company that it's listed does not have an ambulance with that number on it. And that, you talk about Men in Black and weird government conspiracies and those kind of things, that's where my mind went to. Absolutely. It's like, did this guy escape from some kind of facility? But I mean, just, you know, it just, and that's the thing about Campfire, is that I know everybody thinks it's just haunted houses and ghosts, but it's not. There's just some weird things. There's one other quick one I'd like to share with you that happened actually in my area, in the Cleveland area. And we don't get a ton of stories from Cleveland. I'm just as likely to get something from Sydney, Australia. But this woman worked for a major hospital system here, respiratory therapist. So it's morning time. She's to help with a patient. She goes with a transport guy, and they have a patient in one of the big beds. They're in like a freight elevator. They bring him in. They're in the elevator. She looks up across the way to the passenger elevator.
I remember the story. Go ahead.
Basically, herself with a group of people looking back at her. And she's like, you know, kind of like rubbing her eyes, thinking, oh my God, that's me. That's me. What is going on? Bothered her all day. But she had to do her job, right? You have to do your job. You can't just like sit and ponder the mysteries of the universe. So then later that day, you know, it's been a long day. That weird thing happened this morning. It's so strange. She was standing with a group of other people waiting to go home, to get on the elevator, to go to the parking garage or whatever. So she steps on the elevator. She turns around facing that same freight elevator she was in earlier today, and she saw a man and a woman and a hospital bed. And the person with the hospital bed, the woman who was there, turned around, and guess who it was?
It was her.
It was her. She saw her doppelganger both ways, coming and going.
That's one of those rips in the time-space continuum type thing. Yeah. I tell you what, if you love head scratchers like that, and if you love good campfire stories, I'm going to tell you something I want you to check out for sure. Jim has compiled a bunch of these into a series of books. It's called Jim Harold's Campfire True Ghost Stories. Jim, he's got 5 books too. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All Kindle #1 bestsellers in the supernatural category. And just a reminder, Christmas is fastly approaching. All right. Excellent Christmas gifts. I'll put the link down in the show notes. Get yourself a couple hundred copies of this holiday season. You will make the person who loves Halloween very, very happy with some true ghost stories from Jim Harold's Campfire. Right, Jim?
Yes, thank you for that plug for the books. And the books, get high ratings, and we don't skimp. Each book has 70 stories from the show. So it's not like a little pamphlet. It's a nice size book, and we're working on the 6th and hope to have that out by Christmas. But yeah, it's kind of a nice thing. And occasionally I get somebody who comes on the podcast and say, how you hear about us? And, I found you from the books. So sometimes it works in reverse, which is kind of neat. And just a nice way to share some of the best stories, because we try to go through and find really the standouts and share them in another format.
Now, Jim is not the only member in the Harold family that does podcasts. His daughter, Cassandra, has the Unpleasant Dreams podcast, and you and Dar do one called You Won't Believe What Happened to Me podcast. Can you tell listeners what these two podcasts are about and give your family a little love?
Oh, absolutely. Well, Cassandra was very active in high school and college with drama, and now she's continuing her education and wants to become an optometrist. But I said, why don't you use some of that ability that you worked so hard on in school? And she actually, right before COVID, studied in London drama a little bit before she was sent back home with everybody else.
Yeah.
But the point being, I think she does a nice job. Obviously, I'm biased. But we started out the show as kind of like these little thumbnail sketches of different famous paranormal cases. And she came to me and said, Dad, this is not my thing. This is not my thing. I'm not a paranormal person. And I said, I can respect that. She said, what I am is a literature person, because she, one of her majors in school was English literature, and she has cases and cases of books. She loves the classics. So we said, well, why don't we take that love of yours and pivot it into a show where we do classic horror stories. So that's the last year. So that's what we've been doing with that show. Edgar Allan Poe, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That kind of thing is what you can hear on there if you love classic horror, Lovecraft, those kind of things. I think she does a really nice job with it. And we have some nice spooky music in the background, and that's fun. And then, so highly recommended, highly biased.
Show notes. We'll put the link down in the show notes. Okay. And
Unpleasant Dreams. And then the show that I've been doing with my wife is kind of a mix. A long time ago, I did a show called Weird News Radio with Kate Botello, who was on Tech TV and ZDTV, and now is a public radio host up in Michigan and does a great job. But for a short time, we did a show called Weird News Radio, kind of like weird stories in the news. I kind of took that concept, added in some listener stories of weird non-paranormal things that have happened to people, and kind of mushed it together, and we've come up with You Won't Believe What Happened to Me, plus all of our Plus podcasts. And I think Dar does a nice job as well, my wife, and who recently just started working as her main job for the business, which is kind of cool. Awesome. She does a great job with that. And it's like we have a little radio station here in the house. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about it is two things. I think you can appreciate it. One thing was, when I was a little kid, there was this syndicated show on, and it was called Please Stay Tuned. And it was on for like 13 weeks, I think, or 26 weeks. But I love that show. This is late 70s. So a guy runs a TV station out of his house. And I always loved that show because it was very comical how he was hosting the movie show and then running the camera with a string, that kind of thing. And it's like, I've become that guy. Yeah. And because of technology. And then secondly, I would say when I was in radio, I was in advertising sales. Though I'd studied broadcasting in school, I ended up in ad sales. But for some reason, I kept watching everybody else do their jobs, which probably bugged my sales manager a lot. But I was paid attention to the business manager, the traffic manager, the program director. I wanted to know how all the jobs were done. Yeah, and I never knew why. And now I know why, because I do all the jobs.
Absolutely. Doing quite well, too, to be honest with you. That's great. Absolutely cool. And it's really strange, Jim, because when we all had COVID, us dumb jocks had to do a lot of our shows from our closets at home, which I did. And so we all had to learn all the technical aspects of it, as far as how to do things via Zoom or how to do things via clean feed and everything. It was quite difficult, yeah.
And I just want to interject this real quick. You said dumb jocks. I would never say that. I learned so much I worked with great people in Cleveland, and actually some of these people were all-time great people, like Carl Reese, who was a longtime disc jockey here in Cleveland. I worked for the classical station, the commercial classical station, which became public, but the guy who was the voice of the Cleveland Orchestra, one of the best orchestras in the world, for like 50 years. I just worked with so many great personalities, and just watching them, I think, I don't find myself a great on-air personality, but anything that I can do is because I watch them and I paid attention. Yeah, absolutely. And I learned from them. So I would say not dumb jocks. I would say great professionals. And you, obviously, you got it going on. There's no question about it. So my hat's off to those on-air radio professionals I got to work with all those years.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Very good. I want to tell everybody about something you've got very, very special. Now, if you love the paranormal. You loved the campfire stories and some of the things that we've already talked about today. Jim has got something very special for paranormal fanatics. It's called the Plus Club. Can you explain what the Plus Club is and what they get for being a member?
Well, basically, a couple things. First of all, I want everybody to know, if you're a brand new listener, you don't have to pay a penny. You can listen to my most recent 13 weeks of Paranormal Podcast and Campfire for free. And that's a lot of content because we put out the Paranormal Podcast every week, 45 minutes to an hour every week. We put out Campfire every week, 90 minutes. However, if you're a super fan and say, I want more, I want to get all the archives going back to 2005, you can join my Paranormal Plus Club. You can find that at jimharoldplus.com. Click on the banner with my face and get the details. But basically, it gives you access to about 2,500 episodes going back all the way to 2005. Not only do you get the entire over 800 episodes of the Paranormal Podcast. You get over 600 episodes of the Campfire. Then each and every month, and I'm very proud of this, we started the Plus Club, I believe, in February of 2011, and we promised our listeners we would do 8 exclusive episodes every month for only Plus Club members. We have not missed a month through all kinds of sickness and the things that happen in a life and in a family. We've never missed a month. So all those shows you can't even get if you're not a member, and that's UFO Encounters, The Cryptid Report, Ancient Mysteries on the Air. The list goes on and on. I think if you add it all up, it's something like 2,500 extra episodes. So, I mean, and we've interviewed a lot of people on pretty much any paranormal subject you can think of. So really, if you're into the paranormal, start with the free stuff, but then you can take that extra step to the
Plus love it
Club.
too. And let me say this about the Paranormal Podcast and Jim Harold's Campfire. Another honor bestowed on him, the top 1% of downloaded podcasts. That is amazing. I hope to get there someday, Jim.
Well, I mean, what I tell all podcasters, perseverance, because I was just looking, I've been featured about 9 years ago on one of the big podcast sites, and it came up in my Facebook memory. And I look back, and there were a lot of, hip, trendy podcasts, like, oh, this is the hot podcast. And I said, I'm just curious. And I looked one up, and I'm like, last episode, 2019. Looked up and last episode 2020. It's like, again, this is podcasting is a marathon, not a sprint, in my view. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep doing it.
Here we are, a year for us. We're now at our 114th, 115th episode. I think yours is 115th or something like that. So I'm very, very excited about that and doing this, because it's a lot of fun still. I mean, I haven't got to a point where it's like, oh gosh, I got to do a podcast. No, it's just it allows me to do what I do best, what I think I do best as far as that goes, and that's to talk to people. It's something I've always done. It's funny because we'll be in a crowd or something like that, and I'll immediately strike up a conversation. I got this from my father. My dad never ever met a stranger. And it's like, I'm the one that's always talking. It's something I've always loved. Links to social media, Jim. Let's get that first before we say goodbye here. Let's go ahead and give us a link to all your social media. What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, if you're looking for Instagram and X/Twitter, it's at the Jim Harold, and I would really recommend my virtual campfire group on Facebook. You can actually get to that by going to virtualcampfiregroup.com. We have over 25,000 members over there. That is absolutely free. And people share their supernatural stories and kind of bounce ideas. And we have great mods. And it is a very civil online group, which is very, very rare. Because if we get bad actors, we kick them out. Absolutely. But 25,000 members, it's kind of like the campfires going on 24/7, 365 over there. That's virtualcampfiregroup.com.
Very good, very good. Any final thoughts that people should know about you and your podcast, Jim?
Well, I would just invite everybody to listen, and usually the Campfire, Jim Harold's Campfire, you can find it on all the apps in the same place you listen to this fine podcast. You can find it there. And I would just say, one thing I've learned, the world is a far stranger place than we think it is, and just keep your mind open to those mysteries. And happy Halloween, everyone.
Stay spooky, Jim.
Stay spooky.
Hi, this is Rick Anthony, thanking you again for listening to this episode of Someone You Should Know. Now, if you're an aspiring musician or an established musician that's looking for a little exposure, I invite you to drop us a line at someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. That's someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. Also, I invite you to tell a friend about the Someone You Should Know podcast. I thank you for tuning in this time, and I invite you to check us out next time on the Someone You Should Know podcast, because you never know who's going to show up. Until next time, remember, God loves you, and so do I.